Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to look at TrueNAS and QNAP's QTS platform. I'm going to be going through two very different ZFS structured systems here to help you guys decide which one better deserves your data. That's right, we're looking at open source versus turnkey solutions. Now, a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, I am utilizing an iXsystems server for the TrueNAS portion of this video. TrueNAS is completely open source. You can download it. It's completely free for the most part. There's a few little enterprisey bits that you can go for if you go down that route with a, command and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's completely free. You can download it, build your own server, an old PC. You need to have some semi-decent hardware behind it, but you can build your own server from scratch. But it does involve quite a learning curve. Now, the alternative, we have QNAP there, known as a turnkey solution. This is a solution that you buy and you plonk it down, and it's good to go for the most part, with a few minor config options day one. Now, as good as that sounds, it's worth remembering you're going to have to pay for that. And a QNAP solution, although it's very diverse, with some of them arriving with very modest specifications all the way up to high-end Xeons and terabytes of memory, it's worth remembering that these systems, you are paying for a complete solution. You're paying a premium for that. So in today's video, we're looking at these two platforms. In this case, we are using a QuTS QNAP. So that's a system that's going to be taking advantage of ZFS as its file system. And we're going to be comparing it against the open source. We're going to be comparing it against TrueNAS. As you can see here on screen, let's log in to both of these platforms. On the left-hand side of the screen, we've got a TrueNAS installation. It's using an iXsystems Mini X Plus, and we're comparing that against the QNAP here on the right hand side of my screen here, and that is utilizing a TVS 872X. So that is an Intel i5 based system there. If we open up the hardware manager, you're able to see that there. But bear in mind that the majority of things we're going to look at today, with the exception of maybe one item, is available and usable on any QNAP NAS that supports QuTS Hero. I might be doing an ext4 version of this video soon, depending on how this goes, so do stay tuned for that. But first and foremost, the first thing that must hit you when we're comparing these two platforms on screen, they've gone a very different direction in terms of the graphical user interface, the GUI, the thing you see via the web browser there. To put that into perspective, we look at the left-hand side of the screen for me there, and I can see that TrueNAS, as you can see, is a lot more factual. We've got all the graphs and stuff there on screen. It's all kind of manageable via a single user interface. The left-hand side of the screen there, we've got a breakdown of dashboard, accounts, system. We've had to zoom out a little bit to get all of this on screen. Do bear in mind that normally when you see this, they would look a lot bigger there on screen, but of course we've minimized this in order to allow us to present them both on screen. So again, they both support zooming in and out. It's not always going to be this small. This is just for convenience. But if you do like a single interface where you can pretty much get to any accessible option, you're probably going to quite like TrueNAS there, because everything is readily and accessible. You can hide that side menu if you choose, but for the most part, it's all pretty much reachable immediately, all the way from configuration options down to different storage options, sharing options with different protocol there immediately available, even plugins, applications and more, all of which immediately accessible, all the way down, if you choose to go straight into command level access there straight away from the desktop. Now, as the G in graphical indicates, the graphical user interface on the QNAP, on the other hand here with Hero, is far more graphical, comparable to that of a desktop user interface from Windows, from Mac, from Android. You've got lots of icons here on screen. You've got a side menu there that's, again, a great deal more graphical, with lots of details there of applications that I've installed. And again, a whole app center that we'll talk about later on, full of first-party apps. And I think that's another thing to bear in mind between these two platforms. With TrueNAS, you are getting the platform, you are getting the ability to manage your storage, you're getting the ability to control who can access it, control that kind of granular level security and granular level encryption in a number of ways. However, after that, things seem to go down a little bit more of a third-party support route. And when it comes to the QNAP platform, although there is a degree of third-party support probably arguably more than most NAS platforms, there's also a significant body of first-party applications behind it that we need to talk about. But continuing with that element of the graphical user interface and just talking about the design as well, if we have a look, for example, the information here on our system, we can go straight into the CPU there, and it'll immediately open up into an area here where we can see a lot more information about our CPU and what's happening there in the background. And we can break that down into individual disks in the system if we choose. We can break it down into all the disks that are inside this system. This is a 5 hard drive 2 SSD system, and we can get legacy information as well and sort of go back in time if we choose to information from the past. And again, those metrics can be broken down quite significantly into different areas of the hardware architecture within the server. Now, on the QNAP side, we've got a few different options on the desktop there. Let's bring the TrueNAS back to the main sighting there. For a start, at the top right, you've got this dashboard icon here that you can open up to get a little bit of a dusting of information there about your system. And again, some of these you can double click and they'll open up into the resource monitor. And from here, you can break down into a few more metrics and variables with regards to CPU, memory utilization, system resources there, of course, there in the background, how they're being utilized. But again, this isn't legacy. This is current information. You can go into the settings and change some of the information there in the background and how it's stored, and there are third-party tools to get older data from your system, but nowhere near to the same degree and level as we can see there on the TrueNAS side. We can break down into a lot more information with regard to the storage area, but again, that information, unless you go into the settings in advance and ask it to record that information in the logs, you are only going to get current data. Now, you can go in and look at different processes on the system, as you can see there on screen. And again, a lot of these processes, you can't immediately like right click and close like you can on a Windows PC. And indeed, if you head over to the TrueNAS side, you can have a look at background processes, but you are going to need to have at least a modicum of knowledge of command line. And that's another thing to really take away when comparing TrueNAS versus QuTS Hero here on the QNAP, in that when you are looking at controlling the system, although there are a lot of controls open to you in the graphical user interface of TrueNAS, the true control of a TrueNAS system is done on the command line a little bit more than it is on the graphical user interface, whereas on the QNAP side, you tend to find that it's more graphical led with the option of command line if you have that skill set in your bag. Now, if we go into the system configuration options of how they're both presented on both of these, again, we're going to see left hand side lots of commands and controls there all along the side of things you can do. But as you break into each of them, it has to be said that although there is a significant number of tips and guides, a lot more than I gave credit for TrueNAS back in the free NAS days when I used to use it, it's still going to be a little bit more intimidating for most users to be able to micromanage their server than they can on the QNAP. Now, some might argue that you should have a necessary body of information at your fingertips and at least skill set to truly look after your storage, particularly if you're the kind of tech admin of a business. But a lot of people go for turnkey solutions like the QNAP because they're kind of wanting to learn on the job a little bit, which, you know, there's pros and cons to that. But on the QNAP side, it's a lot more user-friendly. It's not as user-friendly as a Synology system, but it's still more user-friendly than the TrueNAS system overall. The TrueNAS gives you a vast array of controls and customization and configuration to create a truly bespoke storage system. And the QNAP does a fairly good job of that, but it's still a much more closed system compared to the TrueNAS, which may be to the benefit or the detriment of different kinds of users there. Now, stepping away from a lot of those controls there in the background, we can talk about one thing that QNAP and indeed Synology, in my comparison, I touched on this as well, provide that TrueNAS, at least for the first party and at least in a very user-friendly way, doesn't seem to offer. And again, this is something that less technologically or network storage versed people are going to be that worried about, but a simple file manager. On the right hand side of the screen there, you can see But within the web browser, I can open up a standard file manager, much like if I wanted to use on my PC, just going through breadcrumbs, file structure, photos, looking at images, breaking down, all of that kind of stuff I can do here on the QNAP via this interface. I can go straight in, go into my Plex Media Server library, go into Photos, open up an album, break down even further, go in there, and again, I can go through, see thumbnails, switch to a larger display of graphics, and as it loads in the thumbnails, I'll be able to see my images. Now, more than that, I've also got tailored applications that I'll talk about later that allow me to listen to music on the go, watch videos in my browser, or set up a video server, look at photos with AI-powered photo recognition in QNAP. And again, I will touch on this stuff later. But a simple file manager, it's just not available on the TrueNAS side, or at least as far as I can find it. On the TrueNAS side, what I can do is go into my storage. I can manage a lot of my shares. I can really break down quite significantly into what I can do with my storage there on the TrueNAS side. I can go into the sharing protocols there and create dedicated areas of sharing space, ranging from simple block-based ones like iSCSI, where you create a target and a LUN to make the storage on your NAS have the appearance of localized storage, which is better for some applications running on your client OS hardware, or create simple SMB network file shares, WebDAV, remote, all of that from there, along with a vast array of service options that can be enabled and disabled very quickly on the fly, as well as tailored configuration options, again, full of little guides and helps and tips. So it isn't to say that TrueNAS doesn't have a huge degree of file managing and remote file management services. It just doesn't seemingly have, at least in the first party, a similar amount of in-browser file management there. Again, if you weren't planning on accessing the NAS via your web browser very often, and you were hoping to access your NAS using your proprietary OS file management, none of this is going to matter to you a great deal. But again, there are users out there that want to be able to manage their NAS in all of those ways, not just some of them have the option for all of them. The same goes for mobile applications as well. There isn't a mobile TrueNAS app out there. It can use a huge array of third-party applications, I would argue largely more than QNAP in some cases, but they don't have their own first-party file management apps and not first-party tailored management apps there. Continuing the subject of file management, another thing that I touched on my Synology versus TrueNAS video that still holds true here is a complete lack of a search functionality from the dashboard there. Now, a number of you might say, who cares? I don't use search. You know, when I want to use my computer, I want to use my computer. I know what I'm doing, and I get that. But at the same time, if you are relatively new or you're looking for a preset setting and you want to get to it as quick as you can, the idea that I've got a spyglass here and I can search for a specific service, type in iSCSI there, and then it breaks it down into guides, breaks it down into services, or the iSCSI manager, I like having that option. In the same way, more modern versions of Windows, although I install something here called Windows Shell on my PC that allows me in Windows 10 to be able to have that oh so familiar menu, I know a number of you would rather go down here and use the search function. Or when you use more modern versions of Windows 10 or even 11, there is a search bar that you search for a function and it finds it. Now, I can't find that feature in TrueNAS. In TrueNAS, I can go in, and in some options, there is the option of a search bar. So preset within different ones, such as if I go to plugins, I can go ahead and use a search function there. And indeed, there are other areas of the system where search functionality is supported, but it's just not system-wide. And that's a real shame that you don't have that ability from a single user interface there to access anything via a search function. And that search functionality is a great deal more detailed than you might think, with enhanced search functionality with QSearch in conjunction with QFiling to allow you to do AI-assisted or even intelligent searches of the entire NAS system for individual files or services. Now, flicking things over, I think we have to address the elephant in the room. And that is to do with security and, of course, ransomware. QNAP was one of the brands that was probably, of all the brands in network attached storage, most heavily hit by nefarious users taking advantage of remote access to a NAS via poorly constructed firewalls and port forwarding on their systems, as well as at least one case where a vulnerability was found in one of their applications, allowing attackers to introduce and inject a command into the NAS, which would then encrypt the content and then leave a ransom note where the user had to pay, I think it was 0.1 or 0.3 Bitcoin, something like 0.03 Bitcoin, something like £1,000 to £1,500 to get access to their data again. Now, where does TrueNAS sit on this? Because TrueNAS is not infallible. No software, and let's make it abundantly clear, is completely bulletproof. Whether you are building on the basis of FreeBSD into FreeNAS, into TrueNAS, or you're using Linux-based systems like QUTS and QTS, nothing is 100% perfect. It cannot be, because as soon as a new update is unveiled, hackers try to break through different command levels on the design of this software until eventually a vulnerability is found, whereupon they either report it to a bounty program to make a bit of bunts, or they use that vulnerability to exploit money from people, hence ransomware, whereupon a software developer sees the vulnerability, closes the vulnerability in a patch, and then issues a patch. So, again, they're not exclusive to QNAP, the idea of ransomware, but what is very distinct between these two platforms in 2022 is architecture. So, in the App Center on the QNAP, if I want to install an application, I can go into the App Center here, and there are lots and lots and lots of apps. Indeed, some of them have already got updates here since I last visited this QNAP. Now, if I go for an application here, I can go ahead and, for example, let's say I want to install Download Station, and then I'll click download, and it will download that application there in the background. Now, on the TrueNAS side, if I want to install an application, I go into plugins, I will go into the community tab there, and I'll select an application. Let's go with MB. I click install. It's warning me now that this is a third-party application. Bear in mind, Download Station is a first-party app, so I wouldn't have seen that. And then from here, there's actually a large degree of choice about the installation. And this is a very important point and a good point for TrueNAS. Because first and foremost, if we were to install our application here, we can choose a lot of the settings early on rather than installing the application without it asking me a lot of that information. From there, I can choose restricted IP practices if I wish to for that application, and more so, I can go into an advanced tab here that will let me configure to an enormous degree how applications are installed. Indeed, thanks to the jail system built into TrueNAS, you can make sure that any application or service that you install via a third party on the TrueNAS is completely isolated from the rest of the core system. So if a vulnerability is found in that, you can make sure that it stops right there. And you can go into painful detail about the credentials of how you install that application. Now, in the case of the QNAP, had I created multiple storage pools, and I will talk about the storage area in just a moment, then at least it would have allowed me to choose where I'm going to install that application. But that's really the extent to which I have customization and control on where that application is installed, which may put some users off. That's particularly true when you see just how many third-party applications are installable on the QNAP. Now, I personally like the wide array of applications and tools that are available on the QNAP platform. I think a lot of the third-party homebrew design scene, a lot of the work that's being done in the background, all of these tasks and applications that are being ran in the background, all of these things, if you choose to and really dig deep, you can find some incredibly unique and innovative tools at your disposal. But nonetheless, it's worth remembering that when you're doing this, you are still installing third-party tools, some of which are unsigned. And you can go to community resources such as QNAP Club which again has a frankly insane number of third-party tools that you can install on your system in order to make the most of your storage with very tailored apps and converted applications for Windows and Linux and more that work on the QNAP NAS, both within the web browser and remotely. So again, some great stuff there, but there's no avoiding that although there is a huge number of first-party applications on the QNAP system and an even larger number of applications in the third-party, you don't have the same level of control about how you're installing them there. And I think for some users that may be an important distinction. You can go into the settings menu and choose not to install applications without a valid digital signature, which means unless QNAP has signed it off officially, it won't appear. And that extra app center I added manually, as well as making sure that automatic updates kick in if you choose to, so you can make sure that all updates are immediately applied if there are patches issued for any vulnerabilities or any improvements on them, all to be installed. But still, I think it would be nice to have this level of installation control on those applications in the QNAP there. Now, let's head back to the storage there, because I think it's an important subject to talk about, particularly when I'm looking at two systems here that are ZFS in structure. QNAP does arrive with a wide arrangement of ext4 supported systems. They don't support BTRFS, but if we go into the storage manager, once again, the keyword we're going to keep coming back to is graphical. So in the case you can see on the left-hand side of the screen in TrueNAS, it's a lot more digital there, it's a lot more text heavy, and you can still do quite a lot of stuff there. You can add data, create new data sets, new volumes. You can go ahead and change some of the existing options that are built in, some of the default options too. There's, as you would expect, a wide arrangement of configuration options there off the bat. Indeed, you can create brand new ones if you choose to, so create a brand new pool. And from here, if you add additional drives, unfortunately I have used all of the available drives in this system, you can go ahead, create a brand new pool easily, and from there also select what kind of pool you want. So it does kind of hold your hand a little bit there in the background if you want to utilize it as a hot spare to the existing system, to utilize it for metadata, to back up the faster active processes. But again, they do support fusion pools, which combines multiple storage types into a larger pool where it can take advantage of faster performing media assets inside. So by media, I mean hard drives or SSD, and install the right data on them. All of that built in. And indeed, if you create a storage volume that is problematic, the system will allow you to force things through. It won't rigidly stop you from creating a rather unique, although it could potentially be, unsafe storage setup down the line. It's trying to give you a fine line between a wide ranging of control and customization, while at the same time at least guiding you to the right choices, whether that is if you're not utilizing the right amount of redundancy, that you're using drives that may not be compatible for the end task, maybe you're trying to use a hard drive for the metadata, stuff like that. It will try to guide you the right way there. Now, the QNAP side of things, as mentioned, is a lot more graphical. As you can see here, we can go into the disk area there and it will detail where individual disks are. As you can see, there's our storage disks inside there. We can go into our RAID groups there. We've got one RAID group here that's taking advantage of those 3 disks. Now, if I want, I can create a brand new RAID group relatively easily. As you can see there, I can, scan these drives, check the health of the drives and more. But if I want to, go into the storage and snapshots area, and it will break down the area of storage I've created. Bear in mind, I am using a ZFS system here from QNAP. Consequently, I can utilize compression and utilize deduplication in the same way that ZFS allows it on the TrueNAS platform. But from here, I can create a brand new storage pool if I choose. Again, there are similar settings because they're both utilizing the ZFS platform. I can go ahead and if I choose to, create a single drive there, and it will detail what the settings are that are available to me. Again, I can try and combine some of these disks if I choose and create a more unique storage setup there, but do bear in mind, of course, when I'm doing this, that not all of the same RAID Z options on TrueNAS are immediately available. If I go ahead and create a nice simple RAID there with 2 drives of completely the wrong configuration there, it will still allow me to do it. So I'll go ahead and create a RAID 1, even though these 2 drives are completely different capacities. Then I can go ahead and click next. And as you can see, it's warned me they're different capacities, but it will still allow me to continue. It will also allow me to enable some of the background settings there, as well as make sure that snapshots are supported and more. And indeed, I could have created that very, very quickly. But I do feel like on the TrueNAS platform that the guidance isn't quite as fluid. It allows me to create things, but at the same time, the QNAP side of things seems to present things a little bit more user-friendly. The same goes if I want to create different kinds of storage. If I want to create a brand new LUN, and I'm going to obviously have to create a target as well. And in the case of the TrueNAS, I go into sharing and then go into block shares. Now again, it arrives with a wizard, so I can create our brand new iSCSI target and spaced LUN. But those options are quite there, quite straightforward and all broken down. The QNAP allows me to do that from here, creating that LUN for storage, but of course I will need to create our target utilizing another application built into the system in that SAN manager there. Opening it up here on the iSCSI and Fiber Channel Manager there, and as you can see, I can go ahead and launch the configuration wizard if I choose to, much the same to guide me through the process. And it just feels like there's a little bit more information on the QNAP side than on the TrueNAS side. But again, after that, you will find that configuration on the TrueNAS side is significantly easier. It's easier in terms of what it allows you to do, but it's still going to be harder in terms of the learning curve overall between the two of them there. And I think that's one of the key differences. The QNAP manages to provide you with a lot of the similar options that TrueNAS provides you on ZFS. Not all of them, however, but it does provide them in a little bit more of a user-friendly way, I think. The same goes if I want to create certain more bespoke storage options. On the QNAP side of things, you've got options such as Virtual JBOD that allows you to bolt on existing storage elsewhere, hybrid mount that allows you to attach bog standard cloud storage from cloud providers like a Dropbox, or more advanced storage to turn such as AWS or S3 type storage into localized appearing, ultimately allowing you in both directions to share and hybrid bare metal and cloud level storage into this nice hybrid share area there. With caching acceleration, both systems allow you to very quickly and easily create areas of caching. So for example, in the case of the storage pool, I would go into that add button there, create that new pool, and I would select the option to create an area of cache there. In the case of the QNAP, I'd go down to the cache acceleration tab, click plus, click start, find the SSD that I've installed on the system. I can choose which kind of caching algorithm I want to use, select the disk as I've done there, click next. And you can see in this case, because I've selected a cache type that requires read-write cache, it would require 2 disks. But still, nonetheless, it's nice to be able to assign that cache in this way. But one thing I will say, much like cache and indeed encryption, caching and encryption is done to a wider degree on the TrueNAS platform. On the TrueNAS side of things, encryption, for example, can be applied onto the pool level. It can be applied to the data set, to the volume, incredibly detailed methods, as well as a larger degree and wider degree of support of SED, self-encrypted drive media. QNAP has a lot of these options, and a lot of those encryption options are readily available, all the way down to creating a shared folder that features encryption as well, but it's still not quite as widespread as it is on the TrueNAS platform. Another thing that's more widespread on the TrueNAS platform is API support. For those that aren't aware, TrueNAS from the ground up throughout its entire build is API designed. So if you want to integrate third-party tools, third-party operations to interact with the NAS, but you don't want to give them credentials that can be harmful if misused, you can create an API key within the TrueNAS system for pretty much anything. Now, you can do some API control stuff on the QNAP, quite a lot in fact, but still not quite as much as you would find on the TrueNAS side. Indeed, when it comes to things like two-step authentication. Both systems support two-step authentication readily and easily in their accounts area. If we go in, create a user account, we'll edit an existing account there. We can go ahead, edit the account, and enable things like 2FA and two-step verification very, very easily. And indeed, support of Microsoft Account and Access Account Control, ACL, is seemingly a little bigger and a lot more broader there on the TrueNAS platform overall. And there's a greater degree of flexibility in that two-factor authentication on the TrueNAS. Now, on the QNAP side, again, you have two-step authentication. You can go in, you can go ahead and create two-step authentication very, very quickly and easily. However, it doesn't have the same level of diversity in configuring the two-step authentication or support of 2FA, and it's actually quite configurable, as well as enabling a passcode system as well on TrueNAS, which adds another layer of access as needed. They both use standard Google Authenticator and kind of the preset popular 2FA supported services out there, but to a greater degree of configuration, TrueNAS kind of brings a lot more of that bespoke customization, which again is what we're going to keep coming back to time and time again there. Now, earlier on, I mentioned account creation. This is something that I talked about in the Synology comparison that once again is worth talking about. If we go into how both systems handle users, you're able to see that on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the full list of system-generated and user-generated accounts here. We can create a brand new user account relatively easy. We've got the standard information there that we can add. We can add them to an existing group if we choose to. We can also assign permissions to different areas of file folder storage, as well as what their behavior is allowed there. You can also assign and connect it with Microsoft account methods if you choose to, and overall there's a good level of access and creation there. If we head over to the QNAP side, again, we've got a lot of general users created here. I can go ahead and create a new user. With them, I can create a user ID if I choose, actually give them an image. I can also assign phone numbers, email, that sort of thing as well. I can also apply two-step authentication if I choose to here, as well as change their access privileges all within this single window with drop-downs. There's a lot of information being thrown at you, but at the same time, it's still nice to have that level of access, control, and configuration. Now, although the TrueNAS side of things keeps things a lot more detailed, and I would say a lot more easier to read on a single screen there. Remember, we are still doing this squish side-by-side thing. I would highlight that the QNAP presents the option of importing and exporting an existing database if you choose to. On top of that, you can create multiple users very fast. Now, I've been told that TrueNAS Scale supports a similar functionality to these, but not quite at this same ease of use. And TrueNAS Core, which is what we're reviewing today, doesn't have that option at all. And you can very quickly create groups of users or bulk batches of individual users, and then within that, assign those users to groups very, very quickly. And again, you can change the details for that user group, as well as their configuration and which files and folders they can access, and their quotas and more very, very quickly. Now, moving away from users and groups, let's talk about networking, because both of these systems have slightly different methods, not only of displaying, but also configuring network control. Now, if we head in and go into the system settings there, and we have a look at the TrueNAS system here, we can go into the network, and from here we can get a network summary. It's not as topographical, because if we choose, we can go into advanced mode there, click that option, and we can see a breakdown there in the detailed mode of how different physical adapters are connecting. We can even break it down to individual interfaces, and from there, this is where you would enable port trunking and more. Now, these services are obviously all available on the TrueNAS, but although there are, once again, lots of hints and tips here to sort of guide you through slightly, it's quite an intimidating process. And I think a lot of people who are using a graphical user interface on a browser might appreciate a few more options to look at there in between them. Yes, the QNAP is arguably oversimplifying things, possibly to its detriment for more technical versed users, but still, if you are starting your journey on your own storage server and these things are a little bit of an unknown to you, you may well appreciate having these configuration options presented in a slightly more chewable friendly way there. Now, on the flip side of things, I want to talk a little bit here at the bottom where you see advanced and basic tabs. As you move through the system, you may notice that the system has advanced and basic tabs in a number of different areas as you browse through the system. The ability to change difficult options, or at least filter out the slightly tougher options there in the background. Now, TrueNAS has that in some areas, but not the whole system. TrueNAS kind of gives you all of the controls straight away. Most of them, as you can see there on screen, are turned off by default, which is a blessing, but still nonetheless, it throws all of the options at you for the most part. And I think if you don't quite know what you're doing, that can be intimidating and also can leave you to a lot of kind of conflict about setting up your storage for the very first time. The same goes for when you're dealing with your enclosures and dealing with what the system is able to do, and so you know its limitations rather than you being able to configure your dream server and not being able to back it up with the hardware you've got on offer. Pretty much all of the services and functions of TrueNAS are available on the QNAP side, either in a streamlined form or in a ready to access, but arguably slightly more dumbed down fashion. There aren't many things, with the exception of the API driven design and some of the dataset and RAID options, that aren't available on the QNAP side. But the QNAP side does have its own downsides on that. First and foremost, it can be a great deal easier to overwork the QNAP system. If you do too many things very, very quickly, even on these more powerful systems, QuTS can sometimes hang just a little bit there. That's something I never experienced when using the TrueNAS system when flicking through the options, when I was going through changing pools to changing some of the network IP options there. The QNAP side every now and then would hang because I was doing too much and the system was lining up all these things that needed to be done, and I got the impression it didn't manage or oversee all of them in quite as efficient way as we saw on TrueNAS. Now, on the QNAP side of thing, it is worth mentioning that navigating it is significantly easier. We talked about that at the top of the video, but sort of navigating all the different windows and options on the QNAP, if you've ever used any desktop operating system, everything feels very intuitive. It's in the right place. You can even customize the desktop to a small degree, and again, that's more to do with the background and some of the background kind of icons and images and text size. If you go into the control panel there, you can change some of the visual display options quite easily by going through some of these options here. On the TrueNAS side of things, when it comes to changing some of the design settings of it and how things look, you can change the theme a little bit in the preferences, so create a brand new theme and change some of the icons. And, you know, on the whole, I think you can change more on the TrueNAS side overall, but still you're really just glossing up a lot of the text stuff that you've seen there on screen, so it's not making a vast amount of difference there. Now, on the QNAP side, another thing that's worth touching on when we look at all of these applications is tailored access, because the QNAP is trying to be a jack of all trades. That's kind of a little bit of the problem there in the background with regards to the system trying to do too much at once. So, as mentioned, there are applications for AI photo recognition, there are applications to enjoy your music, there are applications to enjoy your video, all of which can be configured in this window and then allow these services to be streamed from remote devices. So you can make the NAS, make all of these visual assets presented in the best possible way to be picked up and controlled remotely by these third-party clients. Indeed, the AI photo recognition is very impressive. Comparable to that of Google Photos, it allows you to not only get photos of people and recognize faces and then name these people, as you can see there on screen, but what you can also do is make your way back and then look at things. It has object recognition built in there. So as you can see, it can break down into different subjects animals, cake. It will recognize the content of a photo. That isn't the naming, that is the AI algorithm being utilized, the AI engine, to recognize things. Now, it's not always right, as it isn't on Google, but it's nice to have that option. Now, these things are not native to TrueNAS. You can install those third-party applications as mentioned. You can go in via the community tab, and there are lots of applications from third parties, as well as an active homebrew scene from TrueNAS there, users who use TrueNAS and configure applications and tools towards it, but you're still utilizing third-party tools for the most part. And I think some users may be less keen, although you have the jail system to keep things as completely segmented and separate as possible. Some users may not quite like that level of third-party permission being allowed in their system there. And again, all of these tools are ready and available from that App Center there from QNAP. Now, let's return to that subject of security there. When we talked about security earlier on, I talked a little bit more about QNAP and the issues with ransomware that were raised in the last year and a half. Now, QNAP have tried very hard to put this behind them, and arguably I don't think they've washed it off of them completely yet, and I think they're going to be carrying that for quite a few years. But where they've tried to make improvements throughout their system are twofold. First and foremost, you've got the localized stuff, such as utilizing malware remover that's built in, and you can do scans of your local system, but more so applications for firewall control, applications for dealing with security settings in the system, and all of these can be managed from within the Security Counselor. The Security Counselor will allow you to, with your system, either schedule and manage different kinds of internal and external monitoring policies, as well as changing the security policies to either custom design or very medium, so low, medium or high level settings that will change throughout the system. And then you can also run scans. As you can see, you can produce a report, and as you can see, it's detailing things that it's noticed that it's not happy with. Again, there isn't, what I can see on the TrueNAS side, a wizard that will run a complete check of your hardware there. You can go into the services options as mentioned and configure these options, and they're all turned off by default, and then turning them on, it will go through the pros and cons of doing them. You've also got, as mentioned, the ability when installing applications to place them in jails, which is always useful. But nonetheless, fair play to QNAP to have this security counselor so you can manage all of these things from a single interface. And again, they did that with multimedia console as well, the ability to manage all of the multimedia scraping, transcoding and more from that single user interface on your system, and content management for all of those applications. There are tools that allow you to do that from the third party, but not to the same degree. I apologize for the cough. Now moving away from that security thing, we can talk about the second thing QNAP did and indeed was forced to do with their system, and that was to do with MyQNAPCloud. Forgive me, I'm just getting over a bout of COVID a few weeks ago. I've not really got rid of that cough yet. Now, from here, this is where you can create a remote access tunnel to your NAS via QNAP. You have the option to install things like SSL certificates, and you can configure your router remotely from within the QNAP, but still nonetheless, this is one area of using a NAS and allowing and creating that remote access pool that I think no brand has really got right yet. Some are better than others, and I think in this case, the ability to change your router configuration settings without enough warning, for me, is disconcerting. I don't think you should be able to access and play with settings like this with such relative ease. Yes, you should have your backups in order. Yes, you should utilize a multi-stage backup parameter there. But at the same time, this is an area where I think QNAP makes things arguably too easy, because once all of the users are using the same ports and accessing in similar ways, as you can see there, that's the system hanging there while we're trying to go for different options. And again, going back to my earlier point with the QNAP, that can happen when you're trying to do too much at once, because I think the QNAP is trying to be too broad a platform, and sometimes to its detriment, things like that can happen. Now, on the TrueNAS side of things, we can see that within this, it doesn't give you that helping hand when you want to try to access your NAS remotely. You are going to have to do the thing yourself. So for example, if you want to create a web DAV, so that's a remote accessing share on the system, you are going to have to kind of go through it, select the file folder that you want to go with and create that web DAV remotely from the system. But you're still going to have to do a lot of the settings yourself and a lot of the security protocols yourself. But at the same time, that's probably for the best, because you are now punching holes in firewalls. Now, of course, in that plugin center, you've got intelligent network management, and there are ways to utilize things like OpenPF-Sense in jails and more on your system to create a much securer system, but it's still going to be a lot more complex. So it's really hard, as mentioned, to find a middle ground, because on the one hand, you have TrueNAS giving you a vast array of control and customization to allow access to your NAS, and on the QNAP side of things, they've gone ahead and made it fantastically easy, potentially to their detriment there. Next up, let's talk about virtual machines. Once you reach the enterprise level, and particularly when you're looking at ZFS systems that take advantage of things like inline compression and inline deduplication, the application for virtual machine management and hosting becomes exceedingly important. We're reaching a stage now where large organizations will house the bulk of the machines that businesses are using virtually for remote level access to via a hypervisor. Now, that makes things easier in terms of rolling back and storing of data, but also duplication and other options as well. And once you roll in things like snapshots and stuff in the background, as well as the ability to have a VM take a snapshot of it and then experiment with to test resources and test the outcome of certain updates, it can be incredibly important how well your system can handle a virtual machine. Now, as you can see here on screen, both of these systems allow the support of a virtual machine host. Now, both of them allow the integration and connection of third-party tools from VMware, Hyper-V, but both of which allow you to host a VM directly with the NAS's own application running as the hypervisor and the bare metal hosting of multiple VMs there. But when we look at between the two of them, things seem very similar at first. So as you can see here on screen, both of them are asking us to name our virtual machine quite readily. Again, we can give it a name. We'll just call it test. Copy that there. We can say we want to do a Windows VM and we'll call that one test. In the case of the QNAP here, we can see we've given it a name there, OS type. We've got a couple more options there of things like Android as well. Choose which version of Windows we want to utilize there. Whereas on the other side, we can't really select which kind of Windows. Again, it doesn't make a vast amount of difference, but it's just a nice option. We can see from here, we can see the allocation of hardware that we're going to be doing to our virtual machine in terms of individual CPU cores and threads, and memory as well, both of which allowing you to kind of utilize that and also go for virtual memory as well. Next, we can see that you can choose an existing VHD, virtual hard disk, or other ISO image that you can integrate with the system if you choose. Again, QNAP has got that all still within the same single window, which is already quite impressive there, that it's all built into that same window. Again, you can choose an area on the NAS, same thing, you can choose an area on the NAS, click up next. From there, you can say what you want the network interface to be, whether you want to use one of your existing virtual interfaces or share it or create that virtual interface there. And then from there, you can choose if you have installation media, such as an ISO, a virtual image of Windows installation, you can stick it in there. And there you go, that would create our virtual machine environment there. We can go ahead, click submit, and now that's going to create our virtual machine. Now, on the QNAP side of things, we can do much the same thing. We can go ahead, go through all of those options, create our virtual machine. So again, I don't have an image immediately to hand, but what I can do is go into the Plex images in there, select our Windows 10 Enterprise Edition there, have that CD in the virtual CD tray, select where I want this to be on the NAS, so I can select any old folder there. I'm going to go sync public just for the hell of it. Please don't do that. We've got our link. Go ahead, click OK, and now it's created our virtual machine. So you can see both of them have got a nice, easy flick a button and start our virtual machine. but it's from here that we see a wide degree of distinction between these two platforms. And again, how important the following things are going to depend on you, the end user, because if you're looking at this server to host your third-party VMs via VMware, Hyper-V, etc., not all of this is going to matter to you. But if you're intending to keep everything in system on a first-party level, there is a greater degree of distinction here. So you can obviously configure on the TrueNAS side of things. You can change a lot of those settings that you've gone with. You can also choose if you want to connect a virtual device to your virtual machine, if you so choose. Let's bring those options back. On top of that, if we make our way back into the virtual machines and go into those settings, we can go ahead and clone that VM very, very quickly and create our brand new VM. We're going to disable auto start on that because we don't really want that VM to slow down the system while we're doing this video. But that's really it. You can that's about it. Once you run the VM, obviously everything you're going to run, presumably via maybe VNC, or if you want to use remote desktop on your localized PC to access it, that's really the only options you've got. This will open up in a new tab if you choose, but that's about your lot. Now on the QNAP side of things, there's a lot more flexibility, it has to be said. Virtualization Station 3 is one of their best applications. So first and foremost, straight off the bat, we'll look at those configuration options. So from here, not only have we got the standard turn it on, turn it off options that we've seen before, cloning, snapshots and more, but a wider arrangement of things we can configure. So not only can we change a lot of the Windows settings there in the background and the boot options and the network settings and the amount of storage on the fly. And again, do bear in mind, a lot of these options are available on the TrueNAS. You can also assign graphics cards to be utilized by the virtual machine. You can change command level and console level access to it. You can change all manner of settings from within the virtual machine there. On top of that, when you're using your virtual machine within Virtual Machine Manager, let's bring that back open, I've closed it in error. From here, you can see a graphical user interface when the VM is running here in the Windows. So for example, if I power this on, what's going to happen there in the background is not only can I see information on what's running, but on top of that, I can see the contents of it there. As you can see, it's trying to run that VM there. I've not done the right settings. I don't necessarily have the right hardware to run that because I did it quickly. But you can see a window of that information that can be opened up very quickly. You can do that on the TrueNAS system. If we turn that on there. But again, the level of access is slightly different there. Another thing that's worth highlighting while we're waiting to see what that VM is going to look like there, because again, as you can see there, you can use the VNC client to see what you're seeing. And both of them allow access to that virtual machine that we're running, that we've created on the fly. You're still going to need virtual images. You're still going to need all that information. And on the QNAP side, although both of them allow importing and exporting of virtual machines, such as VMDKs and stuff like that, the QNAP even allows you to create a Windows VM directly from within the app. It downloads the ISO for you and allows you to create a VM within 3 clicks. And not only that, you've also got the option to go into the VM marketplace to download virtual machines of things like pfSense and more, and play with some of those virtual environments and network configuration tools. And they take it even further. You've got options such as Linux Station, which I believe I've disabled for this video in order to make sure we had the resources to show off this system in utilization. But you've got Ubuntu Linux Station that in 3 clicks will allow you to install the latest released version of Linux Station and Ubuntu for you to use as a virtual machine. And then you've got containers as well, something that is now supported on the TrueNAS platform, but again, it's a lot easier to access and more on the QNAP. I could go on a lot more about first-party apps, everything from the surveillance applications of QVR Elite and support of USB Station, all the way through to those multimedia applications and even hybrid backup sync, that single multifaceted backup tool that I've disabled for this video because I didn't want all of my backup operations to kick in that are cloned on this system from another video. But again, it's that range of first-party applications that make a huge difference between the QNAP's ZFS Hero platform and ext4 QTS against TrueNAS Core. TrueNAS Core is still far more customizable, still far more configurable with a greater degree of encryption support throughout on each individual tier and layer, as well as with the support of that jail system and decompartmentalizing different areas of the storage, allowing ultimately a system where there can be no super user if you choose, and therefore allowing your mission critical data to remain unscathed. The QNAP platform, on the other hand, is a great deal more user-friendly. It has a lot more first-party software and applications to allow you to make the most of your data. It does this while dumbing down in some areas, and although it makes it a great deal more easier to use off the bat, you may never know the options and configurations that you're changing may be detrimental. Or if you do know what you're doing, you may find sometimes that a configuration or control option is just not available to you that was so readily, although arguably loudly and more aggressively presented there on the TrueNAS platform. And that's the big difference. The TrueNAS platform, it is a free open source platform that you have to invest in with your time and your own hardware. The QNAP platform, on the other hand, is a paid turnkey solution that is a more complete open hardware and software combined solution. It's more open and configurable than a Synology, but it's still not as open and configurable as a TrueNAS. And for you, throughout the course of this video, I hope you've seen the thing that you wanted to know about these two platforms. If you didn't see it, let me know in the comments. I may revisit this subject with an ext4 NAS. We'll see, but for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Hopefully there'll be an article over on NAS Compares breaking down things a great deal more in the description, so if it's there, use it. Otherwise it should be there in the next few days. If you've enjoyed the video, I found it helpful, do let me know in the comments. I apologise if there's been a hum throughout this. I'm next to two NASs just slightly off camera there, and it's very hard to remove that noise. I've got all kinds of stuff happening here, but again, if you enjoyed the video, click like, it helps me understand what I'm doing. Click subscribe to learn more, and I will see you next time.